I witnessed a murder at Hastings, Books, Music, and Video. A story by Jesse Garza, as narrated by Jesse Garza. One of the more innocent memories I have of the place can be surmised in a simple sentence. When I was a little boy, I remember seeing an NES cartridge on the shelf. The game was Double Dare, and neither my friend nor I could even figure out what we were even supposed to do. In fact, our prepubescent brains couldn't even manage our controllers. It wasn't Mario, which I've later come to find is an experience not unlike flicking a coin into a hat. Well, I'm just trailing off to my greater point, which takes us back to the year of 1999. I would love to express how it wasn't all that different from today, but the truth is, it was. The Way by Fastball was on the speakers from their album All the Pain Money Can Buy. A demo of the musical game Unjammer Lammy was playing on the boxy television, which was connected to a just as boxy PlayStation. The girl I was hanging out with, a cheerleader named Amy, and I played it for a moment. Amy was taller, enjoyed picking on me, and had black hair which contrasted against her pale complexion. I suppose when your father does the sort of business hers did, hanging out at a video store is one of your grander realities. On the subject of the game we were playing, I remember thinking to myself, how crazy would it be if you could plug a guitar into the game and use it as a controller? Or better yet, a PlayStation controller shaped like a guitar. I was almost certain that such an invention could never see the dumpster behind a Goodwill. As we were playing it, I overheard a discussion between an employee and who I presumed was his boss. The stocky, dorky, Latino, and ponytailed employee asked from behind his wire-framed glasses, "Should we restock the CD players?" To which his overweight, hairy boss replied, "We just restocked them Wednesday." Nonplussed, the employee informed him, "Well, it's already Tuesday." To which the boss concluded, "Yeah, so that means they'll get restocked again tomorrow. Come on, I'll race you for a soda." I knew the college-age staff wanted to get off their work shift and surf at the nearby coast. Normally, I would let you figure the year out for yourself, but with court dates and the countless discussions I've had with hopeless lawyers, each one more determined to prove my insanity than the last, I've grown sick of telling it. What you're about to read is the seasoned version of my story. It was an average day in early autumn before the turn of the millennium, and I was looking at a huge hardback titled simply Tales from the Crypt. It was a hardcover, the contents of which comprised different episodes of the show, which had by then been long off the air, and their various behind-the-scenes backstories. I suppose the book owed its expired presence on the shelf to Marble Falls being such a nowhere town and the owner of that Hastings location wanting to sell it for every one of the $30 its price sticker demanded. I now realize two things in retrospect. Such a grim printing was the most innocent thing I can say about the ordeal, and it would have made a great coffee table book. Well, I suppose what I had been doing that day is more important, but I'm grasping at straws, or perhaps I'm grasping at pixie sticks. I don't know how else to say this, but I was 17, and I lost what some might call my innocence in the store restroom. It was unlike other encounters I had of that type in that, when she touched my member, it ejected what seemed like quarts of baby-making fluid onto her pasty thighs. Her high school chaperone was nearby, in all his mustachioed glory, and we had to make believe like everything was okay. I remember her placing her elongated finger with its lengthy neon nail to my silenced lips so as to say, "Shush," before we exited the Hastings restroom. Up until this, we were partaking in one of my favorite and most longed-for activities, walking up and down any given aisle at the store and talking about whichever movie or book caught our eye. This activity is one I have spent countless hours doing with friends in all of our small-town boredom. Amy liked horror, but she liked the really nasty, shocking body horror. In retrospect, this isn't all that surprising, as I feel that women who are the biggest perverts generally consume media of this type for whatever reason. Being a mama's boy, I naturally took to a taller, fair-complected woman with wide hips telling me what to do, and Amy wasted no time in doing just that. She instructed me to read the books on the shelves in a commandeering sort of fashion, and I grabbed the closest one to me, the aforementioned Tales from the Crypt, with its grotesque corpse of a show host on the cover. As I pretended to read it, I glared in awe at the white stain my unexpected discharge had created on her Central High Cougars uniform. I was contemplating to myself how she was going to explain the stain when a disheveled man, who I've come since to refer to as murdery Kevin Bacon, came crashing through the aisles. He had kicked down the magazine racks, and the way he smelled was nothing I thought about twice at the time, but something my memory sometimes returns to when I smell something. Murdery Kevin Bacon smelled like a tire factory. My initial thoughts were how wild it was to me how paper-thin the seemingly indestructible bookshelves were, and he wore his shirt on his arm. He just charged through the book aisles like a green beast which might have adorned the shelves he was stomping through, and freaked us out. He was carrying a revolver, one of the most vivid details I can recall, and I had every intention of hitting the floor as though there was a house fire. Before I could do this, Amy grabbed and pulled my face into her breasts. I wasn't a stranger to, well, stranger danger, and the wild gunman's subsequent yelling confirmed everything I had ever been told about stranger danger. What I'm about to tell you wasn't apparent to me at the time, but is what I've since gathered from police transcripts and court records. He took that revolver and pressed the business end of it to the temple of the cashier at Hastings that day. When the cashier couldn't muster the combination to the safe, the smartest organ in his body met the glass which greeted your eyes every time you saw the place. The store's quirky font, which was a common theme throughout, whether it read, "Up to 75% off," or "Newsstand," suddenly had what I can only describe as gore covering it. I sincerely doubt the Hastings graphic designer could have ever imagined his creation would be seen in such a way. The man who I designated as Murdery Kevin Bacon when retelling the story for so long was actually named Jeremy Davis, and I suppose the new millennium wasn't bringing him everything it had promised. The poor soul who met his maker that day was named Russell. The best I can tell is the man was a college student and his family was from Samoa. The only people who don't truly care what anyone thinks of them are Asian college students with bowl cuts. And it was on October 5th, 1999, that Jeremy met a hotter hole than any he could ever put his member into. There was a last name, but it was hard to pronounce, and as such, didn't stick. The first is all I can remember. The Marble Falls Hastings location was in a shopping center or a strip mall. Presently, I've spent so much time alone, day and night, I can still hear their answering machine in my dreams. The sound of a pretty, presumably college-aged girl saying, "You have reached Hastings of Marble Falls. Our hours are 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week." I also remember an automated message, which you likely only could have heard after looking through the yellow pages, of that same pretty girl telling us their copies of Scream were on backorder. If only I could have known that 2 summers later I would be hearing actual screams in that very building. There was another gun blast, and, returning to the witness accounts, he was shooting the safe open. It was said that he had been watching the store for some time, and it was ruled as a premeditated murder. Though where I dwell as of this writing is chilling, it chills me even more to think he was watching my 17-year-old self, my family, or any number of the town's 100,000 residents going to and fro the Media Emporium. I imagined him watching my family buying my Christmas presents, which later that year included Final Fantasy VIII. Murdery Kevin Bacon made off with the whole of $800, which the residents evidently paid to Hastings in the form of horror tape rentals. It wasn't a scene unlike that which could be seen in a videotape they were peddling. The year was 1999, and although it had came out in 1994, many a prepubescent boy was then just seeing Pulp Fiction for the first time. Just like the protagonists the tape featured, someone had to clean the skull from the solid sand. The moment it happened lives rent-free in my mind to this day. When I say rent, what I really mean is it doesn't pay any late fees. All I and the cheerleader I sat beside, who had just finished telling me she was my new mom, heard was basically the sound of a firecracker. Little did we know that this firecracker popped off with the entirety of someone's experiences, and all they ever amounted to met glass. I wasn't able to tell what kind of gun the man had, and all I knew was it was a revolver. It was actually shiny, and if all you ever saw was the man's gun, you would never have guessed what the rest of his possessions looked like. My mother had actually dropped me off at Hastings while she went to Albertsons to get the rotisserie chicken my dad likes. The actual date of the killing was October 5th, and for me it was Tuesday. This is likely because October 5th, 1999 was a Tuesday. I was allowed to take a week off from school. Let me tell you, having actually been there and seeing it all happen from the ground up was something to admire. I smelled the man, and I now had to see my fake-ass elementary school giving a sermon at the cafeteria. 1990s schools always had things in the cafeteria, as though they weren't trying to teach us the entirety of 65 million years in what was essentially a mobile home a summer prior. Another overarching question is, what became of the Marble Falls Hastings? They continued business. All they did was change locations to a nearby abandoned Toys R Us. I suppose you don't just give up your multi-million-dollar investment simply because the white tiles of a checkout lane had been dyed crimson. They rented out copies of Pulp Fiction and True Romance as though the slaying never occurred, and I grew up on a healthy course of metal and porn from the place in the decade which followed. The school counselor called me into his office. I understand you were there when it happened last Tuesday. Johnny from Mrs. Gladden's class was also there. Despite their best efforts, I've more or less stayed silent up until now. I was always a really silent kid, and this event cranked my silence up to 11. I sort of wonder why I wasn't sent to special ed at times, though I suppose my spelling prowess and other strengths saved me from this. Jeremy had been drifting around for some time in southeast Texas, being in and out of jail. The usual story. He grew up in a broken home and was of poor economic means. Jumping to the present, I just had another nightmare. I've never been a fan of the Matrix movies, but in my dream, I went back in time to that moment, and much like in that movie, the world stood still. The bullet was suspended in midair, escaping the barrel, and hadn't touched Russell yet. I was able to observe everything at the store as time stood still. The lady in line buying Tejano records from the store's Spanish-language music section, cowering in fear. Russell scrambling to open the safe, either not realizing or realizing all too well that his life depended on it. Then, time goes on as normal. I hear the closing notes from Fastball's The Way, and cranium goop meets the glass above the green drink fountain. I wish I could say that when I saw the overlit ceiling was the last time I'd ever see the belly of the legal beast, that is, the interrogation room of a police station. In retrospect, it's laughable at how much this isn't the case, but I'll leave that where it is. In 1999, it was the Marble Falls PD, and now it's the Plano PD. The 2010s saw me adrift around the state, and perhaps I even smelled like a tire factory. When I was 17, I gave a simple statement to the suits. You have to remember that, to me, some crazy homeless guy made a ruckus, and several yards away, someone was shot. The fact that I was within the aisles of what is essentially a paid library was something of a blessing. It pains me to think of how much more fucked up I would have turned out if those wooden barriers hadn't been there, because I'm fairly fucked up as is. Then came the day I saw her again. The entire reason I'm recalling this event in such grand detail is at the behest of the strategy my lawyer has devised. They would go back to this event, which, given my current predicament, was something of a godsend. A bargaining chip from hell, as it were. The one thing that could save me from a life sentence or worse. She attested to what happened, and despite the fact that 20 years saw her go through a few divorces and bearing children, she still liked me. Perhaps she had a certain attachment given what we had done that day and what we had both experienced. It would be a fairy tale romance to think we got together or got married, but this is anything but the case. In fact, the moment she was on the witness stand was the first time I had seen her since we were both questioned at the Marble Falls Police Headquarters. I now know only from details my lawyer has given me that she moved back to live with relatives in her hometown of San Angelo. I have to say, when I was looking at her, I wouldn't have minded another 5 minutes alone with her in a video store restroom. After Amy and I had heard the fireworks, I just sort of stayed put until someone with authority told me it was okay to move. Amy wrapped her arms around me and kept repeating, "I'm your mom now." Solitary confinement can't compare to how long I must have been lying there, and the sirens were something of a relief. It reminded me of all the times I lied in bed, hoping my parents weren't going to wake me up and were just going to let me sleep, only for my dad's knocking on my door to become my eventual disappointment. I can't be so hard on murdery Kevin Bacon, as my life has been anything but peachy. I think my lowest point, or lowest point so far, I should say,
had to be when I decided to drive to the old Hastings location at the shopping center. I'm sad to say the act of driving there in such a state has come to be one of my finer deeds. The year was 2009. My high school days were long behind me, and the doors were boarded up. I pounded my empty 2-liter glass vodka bottle against the same oversized pane which had been coated with cranial matter 10 years before. Surprised at the integrity of the bottle, I figured I'd have more luck with the plywood. My drunkenness didn't allow it to register in my brain how tired my arm was by the time I managed to cave in the board. In the aftermath, my arm was sore for about a month. The only illumination of the place was from the nearby streetlights. I kicked down the thin wooden covering and in my inebriated state managed to get my leg stuck. A few frustrated heaves set it free and I kicked the rest down. Struggling to catch my breath, I paused to stare into the spinning void which I had revealed, smelling the musky odor of dust and time, and it felt as though Hollywood danger music was playing in the background. Trespassing there was a personally moral rock bottom. What was then a seemingly endless abyss was where my toddler self had once rented tapes of Denver the Last Dinosaur. I screamed at the blackness, and all that was there would hear me was a computer chair, a few desks, and an unlit display with the same quirky font. I cursed Hastings, murdery Kevin Bacon, and the day that robbed me of my innocence. You may wonder why exactly I consider breaking into this former video store to be a lower point than what I'm about to tell you, and the reasoning is simple. It's an undertaking in which I actually ended up accomplishing something, for better or for worse. In a strange case of coincidence, 20 years from the date which derailed my existence entirely was also a Tuesday. I have to wonder if I owe my current lot in life to a video store chain that went bankrupt not long after everyone found out about Amazon. I spend every morning now in solitary confinement with only a vague notion of whether the sun is out, and wonder if things would be different had I gone with my mom to Albertsons to get that rotisserie chicken 2 decades ago. All I know for certain is that October 5th, 2019 saw me parked in front of a gas station called Town & Country. My shiny revolver was at the ready, and I had been watching the place. I knew with the utmost desperation that if the cashier didn't pull open the safe from behind the donuts, his brains were going to be splattered all over the glass. It was just like my girlfriend's dad had done to Russell 20 years before at Hastings, Books, Music, and Video.